Since the fragments are considered as a normal objects, can the fragment have a constructor in place so that I can send some arguments here? That may be a kind of point where I can send the data to a fragment from an activity. But in fact, that's not a preferred one. Fragments have a easiest mechanism to send the data, which is called through the bundle. Even though fragments, as far as uh, application development, to make things simpler, it's been considered as an object. In fact, the fragment still associated to a process. When you create a fragment, it's been queued in a process stating that whenever the intent permits, these things gets loaded. But we don't need to get into too technical. But at least I can treat as if a normal object. So if I have to send a data to, in this case, the fragment 2, I want to send some data here. This is a transaction part which loads a fragment. Yeah, I think I can create an object called bundle, just a bundle. Primitive data as usual, so put string boolean stuff. All you need a key and the value. So as we already have a standard practice of keeping a key always a constant, string type, the value whatever it may be, in this case it's going to be the string as well. So anything like, just I'll hard code it at this point. So it's as many as bundle objects you can tie up, and finally when you're done with that, set arguments, pass a bundle as an argument. So it's right now your fragment contains an additional data, and of course the fragment is loaded along with this additional data. So how to retrieve it back? So I've added this in the fragment 3, so I can get it back here. This part I'll come back. Additional codes. The right place to get open the bundles, right place, in fact could be opened anywhere, is on create. On create of your fragment. Not to get confused with the on create of an activity, in this case on create of your fragment, you can get back the bundle. Remember, I simply said it's an ideal place, may not be the only place. So I can get I can very well get it. Okay, the value sent by the activity you want to display in your view, in the fragment itself. There you should be little clever, because you got the arguments in onCreate. In such a case, you open the bundles in onCreate. That time, remember, your view is not ready. The onCreate is called just before the onCreate view is called. In onCreate view only we are attaching the layout, not like an activity where the onCreate immediately view, set content view, the layout is get attached and then I open the bundle. It's slightly reverse. The objects would be ready just before the view is loaded. So, but only thing I had to make sure, because the view is ready, because the main purpose of showing the object, I need a view. So the view gets ready at the later point. So there are some ways to get it. Either you can make this as a, if you are opening the bundle in on create as a global object. So on create would have been called before the on create view. So now you can go ahead and attach or display the value here. How do I display? In this case, I need to see what is my fragment 3, something like this. So let me see what is this layout, how it looks like. Okay, seems to be quite simple. This is having a text view alone. I may need an ID because the runtime value being added. I really don't have idea why I gave this name, but okay. So I've just given the ID for this text view. So how I can get this ID so that the value being given by the activity could be loaded on this text view. Now I need to have my text view initialized here. How I'm going to do this? First part. The inflator is actually giving you view. I mean, actually, remember this method expects a parameter, sorry, return type called view. So you need to return a view type. But in fact, that view is retrieved from the layout inflator in this way. But I have a lot of work after that only I could return because I need to get back my text view which is there inside this layout. So how I'm going to do it? For time being, comment it. Let it throw an error for some time. Probably I can make it as a view group. View and view group both are same, but view group is a kind of analogy for my view, saying that the view is a composite view. Inside there are a couple of views exist. So I'm going to consider as a view group instead of view, but both are still same. I'm going to inflate this view. So I'm going to return this view group. Sorry, I just holded the values instead of directly returning through an object. I'm capturing and returning it. Now the text view fragment text something like this. As we know, this time I need to find that particular ID. Usually I use the find view by ID for an XML file, but in this case the XML is being inflated as a view group, so that will be residing inside the view group. Find view by ID text. So at this point my text view is ready. Now I can go ahead and set text with the one I through the bundle I captured. It's a string type. And attach the safety here because obvious reason on create would have received the bundle value and the value would be ready. For a safer side, chances are there sometime the V wouldn't have been received. So if you really want to maintain, you can initialize with a null value. If not null, string type, so C equals, sorry, if equals null, not null alone, we will display the text. However, we won't touch it. It means on one point the bundle wouldn't have received mean it's still null, so it won't make any kind of a null exception or anything else. So that's a better approach to check whether the particular object is null or not. So if not null, of course, it receives the value through the bundle. I can go ahead and display this case. So let me check, see how it goes on. Remember, I just hard coded for our testing purpose. In the real scenario, I won't hard code at all. think this one, yeah. So if you notice the value which I sent through a bundle from an activity is being displayed. So from activity to a fragmented communication, it's pretty obvious, it's pretty straightforward using the bundle set arguments and get arguments. So this way you can send the data from activity to a fragment. And I would advise in another way, the fragment can also communicate back to an activity. But always we have a trouble in doing the opposite side, like in activity. Here also we are going to have some sort of difficulty. An activity could easily communicate to a fragment because obvious reason the activity hosts the fragment. So I'm going to use a keyword hereafter. If I say the fragment, I may say, is there any way I can get the access to my host activity? So if I say what does my host activity mean, where this fragment is being used, that particular instance of an activity I want to get. That is called host activity because the fragments are going to be loaded on a activity. So somebody is hosting them. So who is the host activity in this case? So for me, this my fragment 3 does not even know who is hosting them. But if you really want to know who is actually hosting them, it can be easily just maximize. It should be on attach. I mean, maybe I'll just tell what would be the right place. I think somewhere I implemented. Yeah, here it is. Because that's where the fragment get access to the host activity, because in on attach only gives a confirmation the fragment is being used somewhere else. The on attach is the very first life cycle of your fragment, the very first on the top. After that only on create is called and things goes on. So on attach, it's a confirmation that the fragment is being implemented somewhere on the activity. So if you need to know whose activity, of course, see, remember this is giving you an instance of your host activity. So it already contains that. So this is the instance of your activity. So thankfully it is looking like an object. So if I need to communicate back to my activity, I have a plenty of easy way. Uh, for example, let me try that. I'll have one public method. So maybe I'll put a toast here to see whether the method is getting caught. For testing purpose, remember nothing a kind of a technique I'm teaching you. Trying to say the data communication is possible through this way. A public method exists, we just created. Is there any way I can access the public method? Since I have the instance of my activity at the fragment. Sorry, still I'm in activity. Let me find where's the fragment. Here it is. So if this fragment 3 want to communicate back to an activity, it can easily communicate by getting the instance of an activity, but the point here is this activity is quite generic. It does not know the main activity, it's just an activity. But it does not know what kind of an activity it is. The host activity in this case, the name of the host activity was main activity, something like that. But I need that only, then only I can get access to the public methods of that. Okay, let me have a button so that clicking the button sends the data to an activity. So let me slightly expand my coding. This frame layout, I really don't know why this has been put here. I prefer linear layout. set the gravity to center, so any um, child nodes will be put to the center. Match parent content. We need a text. So we hard coded this point to conserve our timing. So dp let the space be equal. Okay. It's taking too much of time. Okay. Oh, what really happened? Is there anything? Text is causing any issue with match parent. I set the gravity orientation. Anything? This is this pardon? Ah, cool. So the height of this text view has taken everything, so we need to reduce it down. There we go. So this button we are going to click. Then this button is going to send the data to activity. So the usual way to initialize a widget or view is the idea given. So as we know, to implement the button events, there are various ways. Here also I can implement on click listener. So whenever this button gets clicked, we're going to listen the event here. So set on click this. Now it works in this way. I would like to capture a method defined in activity. I want to send it. As I know already, I have an instance of an activity through an argument. Maybe that argument is ready after on attach being executed. No problem, it's been the first one. And it can also be captured in this way, get activity. It's like get base context like that. So getting the context of an activity, I can use a get base context. Similar to I can use a get activity. It means there is a setter getter method exists when on attach is executed. So I can get an instance of an activity directly here. If it is an object, I could get the public method of my activity directly. So what's the method name I gave there? Okay, I think this is this one. This is actually studios. Is there any way I can capture or I can access the public method, because it's just a normal object? So object instance. How to get this thing? Okay. Dot. I can access it. Usual way, because if an object initialize the object putting a dot, and I can get access to a public method in a normal terminology, but this guy is not giving me an access because this activity is very generic. The fragment does not know the name of the activity, which is actually it is hosted. So to get it back, there are a couple of ways. One way being, the name. Sorry. I can typecast telling it the instance of a get activity is nothing but the activity name or which is having a main name. So main activity get values from the fragment, a value sent from I can communicate to my host activity like this way. So the value could be directly sent to my host activity. There it can go ahead and process whatever if it is required. So I can make a communication back to my host activity if this in this way. Before before evaluating whether this method is right or wrong, or this way of communicating the host activity right or wrong, let us first verify whether this is working or not. So if I remember, I implemented in fragment 3. So if I click it, I get the toast. So this toast I've actually implemented in activity. So it's been called, and of course the bundling. I don't need a bundle. In fact, I can directly communicate to any public method of my activity and send the data quite easily. Pretty straightforward and looks easier as well, but it has a major design flaw. Professional developers won't prefer this way to do it. One, the reason why we use fragment, so that the fragment can be used in a modular basis, mean any activity can consume this fragment, not only restricted for one single activity. If I restrict with one single activity, I could do that in the set content view. I can have the view in the XML itself. I don't need to have a fragment to separate the code logic and call the view. But this particular fragment 3 can work only with an activity having a name called main activity. It cannot work with any other activity. If you have another activity where the same fragment is required, it won't work because of the reason my fragment 3 contains a name called main activity. The get activity instance is always interpreted as if the instance of the activity is always main activity. So this fragment loses the modularity. It means the fragment will only work with the activity called main activity. If we have another activity stating registration activity, this fragment cannot be used in that activity, because any incoming activity is being interpreted as if that is having an instance of a main activity. This is kind of a design pattern, is absolutely rubbish. Uh, for example, our sincere attempt to maintain a modularity uh, is actually broken at this point. We cannot use this fragment any activity other than main activity if I follow this step. So I need to find some other way to communicate the data back. Still, I want to maintain the communication, but I don't want to let my fragment knows uh, the get activity instance is always some sort of activity. So how I can do it? Of course, we have a age-old technique which we already did in a couple of exercises back, using the interfaces. Give the job to a connectors. Who's holding the other end of the connector can receive the data. I don't need to know who is that. Anyone having the end can consume the data. So in this example, what I'm going to do, the fragment 2 I'm going to use. Never mind, I can use the same fragment. Okay, just I'll leave it. Maybe we are just getting closer to our lunch break. I'll just create a interface. Interface options are there. Okay, let me create. Some name is my connector I'm giving. Sorry, it's not actually a class, it's an interface. I hope you know interfaces nothing but an abstract class. It will be having only abstract methods. A method needs a place to get implemented. Wherever it gets implemented, that's it starts working. So I gave you an imagination point of view. It is just a connector of your two major components. Uh, a wire, for example, that's what I was talking about. If you have a headlight for a car and the car engine system, because the headlight to function, it requires a power. The power comes from the engine, so a wire which connects both the ends, so that the value data is being transmitted between them. So in this case, your fragment may be a headlight, a kind of a component, a kind of a thing which is going to work, and it is having a dependency over a host activity. So from there it need to get a communication back. So using the interface I can do that particular job. So because the interface is mostly considered as a connectors, so just connects two parts. Okay, so I'm going to say from, I just to differentiate, just giving an underscore. I'll just make it as a using interface string. Any method you put in the interface becomes obviously a public specifier. So a method is being defined. So how I can use this particular class as an interface? There's the fragment 3 itself is there. Probably I'll use that. I may comment this block. I'll remove the imports, anything associated. Okay, nothing is there. No word called main activity. Now I'm going to do, try to declare just declare my interface, but I cannot initialize it if I do not give a space to my interface. But this interface is going to be implemented in the host activity. Whomever using a fragment may have to use the connector implemented, otherwise the fragment cannot communicate back. So now I'm going to, it's already a couple of implementations are there. Okay, this guy doesn't give me a suggestion. Okay, it's just give me some sort of get value from fragment using interface something. Let me implement that method. So this particular interface has been implemented over this activity. So is that abstract method also found a place to get implemented. Let me move it. This coming, this guy. So now the fragment, sorry, this interface is going to receive the information from a fragment, whichever gets communicated. Going back to the fragment tree, which has the particular part declared. Now, in activity, I'm checking if activity having an instance of my connector. It will check whatever the incoming activity, it will only check whether that particular interface called connector is implemented over there. If it is there, it will capture the value from that activity. Maybe typecasting will work at this point. Remember, I haven't given the name called main activity here. No name called main activity. Whatever activity, but it only checks whether the interface called my connector is implemented in that host activity. If it is there, capture that. So now your interface instance you have captured. So as those methods can also be captured. So let me type it. I'm only informing my connector take this data. Who's having my connector's other end will get to receive the data. In this case, any host activity, whatever host activity. So the requirement to use this fragment only to have the particular interface, not the activity name itself. It doesn't even know what kind of activity it's being hosted, but still it can communicate to that activity through the interface. So this interface is being checked in on attach. The host activity, does it contain the instance of a my connector? If it contains, it will initialize at this point. And of course, the object gets initialized through the activity itself, and now it freely communicates the method. In this case, this message is being sent to through this function. Ultimately, it will end up executing the whole function here, because this is where this function has got implemented. So let me see. Did it run? Same result, of course. I get the value, but in this case, my fragment tree no way contains any reference of my host activity name, so that it restricted within that activity itself, but it still communicates back to an activity through a interface. This is a right approach if you really want to maintain a modularity. For example, the fragment can be reused across any activity same time. If you have a registration activity, if you have a login activity, both the case the same fragment need to be used. Yes, you can very well use it, but only one condition: it require an interface. If that interface implemented in both the activity, it will very well use the same fragment and still can send the data, receive the data between the fragments. So it's pretty helpful, and of course this is the right way to maintain our modularity. I would advise you to keep an interface to send the data back to activity in such a case. If you want to get the data from an activity, you already have the set argument, get argument way, which we spoke a few minutes before. Through the bundle, you can send the data to a fragment. Uh, the last one, communicating between the fragments. Of course, the same interface can be used. So your fragment is informing the activity, and that activity can, of course, call another fragment. From that, the data could be injected to a different fragment. So, of course, the same interface can also be used to communicate the data between the fragments. But it should happen through an activity itself, not directly, because the activity actually holding the fragment instances. So this is a simple design technique to communicate between the fragments. What we have seen: setting the argument, getting the argument, and as well as uh, the easiest way, and of course using interface communicate back to a host activity. Afternoon, you can do this exact example probably. Um, I'll also, if possible, if time permits, I'll give an introduction about service. But if not, you get used to this fragments. As much as possible. Later we can move on. I hope I still have a lot of time. So afternoon you can continue this.